All right. Today we are going to continue our study on the five languages of apology. Welcome, welcome to Zoe Fellowship Bible College. This is Dr. Stephanie McKenny, and we have been talking about the five languages of apology. Had no idea that there were five languages to telling somebody you're sorry or that you apologize. So we have learned so far. Expressing regret. The five languages of apology are expressing regret, accepting the responsibility, making restitution. In other words, what can I do to make this right? And genuinely repenting. I'll try not to do that again, and requesting for forgiveness. Okay. So the last session talking about repenting and making sure that you are telling the individual not only that you're sorry, but that you're going to make some type of change. You're going to make change in your behavior, how you handle things going forward, and then requesting for forgiveness, because a lot of times people think, well, I've apologized to that person. That's all I need to do. I've done my part. I've said I'm sorry. I meant that I was sorry. But then it's shared with us in the last class that is so important for us to request for forgiveness. Will you forgive me? All right. Just like I missed last class. I apologize. Will you all forgive me? So that's the extent. And then it gives the person that has been offended the opportunity to decide whether they want to forgive or not. All right, because it now falls back into the hands of the offender. And sometimes people don't want to ask for forgiveness because if they ask for forgiveness, they're uncertain as to whether that person is going to forgive them, or will that relationship be repaired or restored. And so a lot of times people don't want to ask for forgiveness because it takes the control out of their hands and now puts the ball in the other person's court. All right. So in chapter 9, as we're moving on, it talks about learning to forgive. We wonder, like, do we got to learn how to forgive? Yeah, there are steps even in forgiving. All right. So it says in chapter 9, starts with page 137. It says, in this chapter, we move from making an apology to accepting the apology. As we've seen, forgiving someone for wrong behavior can be tough, especially if we consider the offense to be major. Okay. So learning to forgive, and this chapter talks about forgiving and not retaliating and not trying to get back at the person, but actually taking the time to forgive that person for what they have done. All sincere apologies have the same two goals, all right? That the offender be forgiven and the relationship be reconciled. That's what all the apology and the forgiveness is all about. You're seeking for the forgiveness and the apology so that the relationship can be restored, so that there can be reconciliation of some matter, because you don't want to keep the barriers of people holding grudges. You know, you hear people holding grudges and they holding things that have taken place in the past. I'm sure we have all been there. If I asked anybody, has somebody offended you? Did you let it go? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. All right. So we all have been down that road of where we may have to have forgiven somebody because they crossed the line, they crossed the boundaries, they hurt us, they disappointed us, whatever it may be. And so we've got to learn to move on, let it go, as we'll talk about here, and forgiving. When you and I receive an apology, it says we can choose to forgive or not to forgive. Uh-oh. Yeah, you can make that choice. All right. And I know we went back before talking about the scriptures, how it's important for us to forgive if we want God to forgive us. And I know Everybody on here want God to forgive them because we done something at some point, sometime in our lives. We might have done something today. So that's why it's important to ask God to forgive you daily, right? It's important to do that. And so when we present the presentation of forgiveness, we present the presentation of apology, and we are sincere about that apology. It is really up to that person whether they're going to accept it or not. And that's the chance that we all have to take, that whether they're going to accept it or not, depending upon what happened, what took place. So when you begin to work with people and they say they got grudges or they're holding things that their mama did years ago or their daddy did years ago, and they have not let that go, they've made a choice not to forgive. But what happens when we don't forgive, there's barriers. That relationship never gets an opportunity to be rebuilt. It never gets an opportunity or given a chance that maybe it could be better. All right. It could be better after the big disagreement, the big whatever. It talks about some of the couple in here about the infidelity. Some people, we're going to talk about that, but some people who have experienced infidelity in their marriages. You may come across those individuals that have had that experience. Sometimes people want to reconcile even after infidelity, and that's okay. That's their choice. Some people might say, well, how can they forgive them after they did, after they cheated and stepped out on in the marriage and this, that, and other? How can they do that? I wouldn't do that if I were them. We have our opinion of what we would do. And then when we get in a situation like that, sometimes it switches up. But that person had the right to forgive. They made the choice to forgive and to reconcile. They weighed the options that because sometimes if people are in a relationship a long time, they weigh the options. I've been in this relationship a long time. We've had some good times. We do have children. We do have investment. There is still love, and maybe that person dipped out that one time. Sometimes people will forgive, but it is that choice of that offender to do so. Okay, so I'm gonna get on a tangent about that, but this is basically what this chapter is all about. It's about extending and learning to forgive. All right, page 138. Give me time. Reason prevails as you try to gain information. This is the like a bomb falling. Perhaps you find that you were mistaken. This is when you start thinking about the situation and whether you should forgive and all that's going on, or someone has offended you. So you start reasoning, you start gaining information, and sometimes that you will find that you were mistaken, that it was a misunderstanding, that maybe it wasn't as bad as you thought it was, what they did to disappoint you. You read the situation incorrectly. So your anger subsides and you continue to develop the relationship. On the flip side of that, on the other hand, investigation may confirm your worst fears. It is real and it is worse than you thought. The person has wronged you. He has hurt you. She has humiliated you. Her words were unkind, unloving, and disrespectful. The offense now sits as an emotional barrier between the two of you. Often the situation is compounded by our response. She screamed at you, so you scream at her. She pushed you, so you push back. All right, so it's like the situation just escalates as we people act out concerning what has taken place, the offense. The person starts screaming, you start screaming, and it's just back and forth, and it's like a bomb falling, as it says. But let's talk about what forgiveness is. They're using the example of those emotional barriers that take place when the hurt and the disappointment has taken place. So, what is forgiveness? Page 139. There are basic synonyms with slightly varying shades of meaning. The key ideas are to cover, to take away, to pardon, to be gracious to. All right. So forgiveness is parting someone, giving them a pardon, being gracious to them. You're letting it go. You're moving on. You're covering it. You're taking it away. All right. So clearly in page 139, clearly God's forgiveness means that our sins are no longer stand as a barrier between us and God. Forgiveness removes the distance and allows us open fellowship with God. The same is true in human forgiveness. Forgiveness means we choose to lift the penalty, to pardon the offender. It means letting go of the offense and welcoming the offender back into your life. Uh-oh. Forgiveness is not a feeling, but a decision. All right. So forgiveness is not this ooh feeling, fuzzy and cozy, fuzzy feeling, but it is a decision that you make. Okay. It is the decision to continue growing in the relationship by removing the barrier. We're not going to allow this to block our connection anymore. That's what forgiveness is actually doing. I'm going to read on. If you're the offended party, forgiveness means that you will not seek revenge. You know, some people, I'm gonna get them. Oh, they think they got me. They gonna get God. Watch. We got some of us got that fight in us. Like I'm gonna get them, but they got me. I'm gonna have the last laugh. I'm gonna have the last say. We get all through that, right? But forgiveness means that you will not seek revenge, all right? That you will not demand justice, that you will not let the offense stand between the two of you. Forgiveness results in reconciliation. This does not mean that trust is immediately restored. It talks a little bit about trust later on in this chapter. And so, true forgiveness means I'm removing this barrier. I want this relationship to work. I want us to stay connected, and I'm going to pardon it. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to forgive. All right. So it doesn't seek revenge, but it causes you to allow hold on, I got somebody else coming in with us. All right. So it allows you to begin to let go of what is has taken place prior to this forgiveness model. Okay. And so we've got to realize that just as God forgives us, we must forgive as well. So understanding that the offended party has the right, they have the right, if you have offended somebody, they have the right to make the decision to forgive you. Okay. And so that's what it's basically talking about. So once a person asks for forgiveness, then it's up to us to make that decision. It's up to them to make that choice to forgive that person and to move on. Because the key thing is you want reconciliation. And so you may come up with some individuals that you may share with, that you may counsel, that have old grudges and they have things that they have held in their heart concerning loved ones. And so you have to take them through these 5 languages of apology, and then getting them to the point where they will begin to forgive the individual that has offended them. Okay. All right. So we're going to move on to page 141. All right. Jesus declared to his followers, do to others what you would have them to do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. We've heard that before. Treat people how you want to be treated, right? And so the Christian message is that we can forgive because we have been forgiven by God. And so that's the role that you want to take them, because we have been forgiven by God. Look what we have done. And so you want to begin to share with them, as God has forgiven us, we must forgive, and we must extend that olive branch. All right. Um, the ideal to take the initiative to apologize. In that small paragraph there on page 141, the scriptures encourage us to judge our own sin before God moves to judge us. As we would judge ourselves, we would not be judged. That's in 1 Corinthians 11 chapter. That's right. If we would take the time to judge ourselves, then according to the word of God, if we would judge ourselves, then we would not have to be judged by all these different other people criticizing or telling us you have offended us. And so it's important for us to make sure that we live according to what God's word says. All right. All right. So let's move on to page 142, as we talked about not trying to get revenge. Because a lot of times when people have been done wrong, you have you have apologized to them. You have been genuine in your repenting, and you have asked for forgiveness. And sometimes people will say they forgive you, but then they'll later come back and try to still get you back. Oh, why do we do that? Why? Why? But listen, true forgiveness doesn't cause you to try to get revenge. As I said before, don't try to get revenge. Page 142. Many of the irritations in relationships we can overlook, forbear, accept, but moral failures always stand as a barrier that can be removed only by apologizing and forgiveness. Drop down a little bit. The scriptures teach that vengeance belongs to God and not to man. Okay. And so we got to realize that it's not getting someone back. So if you come across somebody that you have to counsel and they're talking about, well, I'm going to get them back, you got to realize and express to them that let God handle those things. And what is getting back at somebody going to do? All right. That's going to continue to create a barrier. That's going to continue to create resentment, bitterness. All of those things will begin to be rooted in your heart and your spirit. So why continue with that cycle? All right. Because some people, they go around and they forgive, and then they want to get back. And then the other person, and it's just back and forth, back and forth. And it's very tiring. And so it's important for us to begin to encourage others that, listen, don't take yourself through that pathway. There is a path that you can begin to learn to forgive and let it go, and allow God to fight it for you, because some things you can't fight anyway. All right. Maybe some of y'all have recognized that there may have been some things you tried to handle on your own, and then you come to find out that you can't handle this fight. This fight belongs to the Lord. And so teaching people to not only to ask for, to apologize and to ask for forgiveness, but also helping them to let go of what has taken place. And that takes time. That takes time, as it talks about in the chapter about, even if you have forgiven, forgiveness doesn't mean that I will necessarily trust you again. All right. That's two different things. And just because you forgive someone doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take them back in your bosom. Okay. It takes time to rebuild trust. Yes. You think about the scenario again in the relationship. If there is infidelity in the relationship, what you're encouraging them, if they are saying that they want this relationship to be reconciled, they want to work on this, they want to build it, they have forgiven, and now they're moving on to trusting again, and that takes time. Okay, you can't rush it. Can't rush it. All right. So releasing the person to God, page 142 and 143. I'm talking that about that again because releasing it, not holding grudges, not trying to get revenge, but actually leading a person to releasing this thing over to God once and for all. All right. And sometimes that takes time too. Okay. Forgiveness, this forgiveness model or forgiveness process, sometimes it's easy. You can just say, "Oh, I forgive you. They ain't no, don't worry about that. We're gonna move on from that." And then there are things that have been done that are very hurtful, that are very disappointing, that are very embarrassing, things that are shameful. And so, and sometimes it takes time for that person to heal from what has taken place. They're much less forgiven. They trying to get themselves together from based on what happened. Okay. And so it takes time and it's a process, but you want to be able to lead people to the place where they do forgive and they release it to God. So here is on page 143, and one of those paragraphs before the highlighted, forgiving when the apologizer doesn't speak your language. Once you have released the person to God, then it is time to confess your own sin. Remember, hurt and anger are not sinful, but often we allow anger to lead us to sinful behavior. Explosive words or destructive behavior must be acknowledged to God and to the person you sinned against. Don't allow the other person's refusal to apologize to keep you from apologizing. He or she may or may not forgive you, but when you have apologized, you will be able to look yourself in the mirror knowing that you are willing to admit your failures. Okay. So sometimes it comes to a point that because you held the grudge from that person, that you may actually have to um, confess your own sin of what you held in your heart because of what they did. Okay. So you want to make sure that not only you are clear with that person, but you are clear with God. Make sure that they are clear with that person, but they are also clear with God. Because the Bible says, "Be ye angry, but sin not." And so when you're angry and upset, okay, we understand that that is an emotion that is real and that happens. But don't get to the point where we start sinning. And when I say sinning, you got bitterness, you got resentment, you got hatred in your heart because of what this person has done. So you be mindful of those things. So sometimes you may have to confess, or the person may have to confess their own sins because they held the bitterness inside. Okay. Um, so basically, that's what the chapter is about: learning to forgive, learning to let go, learning to make the decision to forgive, learning to make sure that the person doesn't continue to hold that grudge, but they're using the language of they're apologizing, they are asking for forgiveness, and then uh, the other person learning to let it go and to move on. The trust, the tender plan, page 147. I'm jumping a little bit here. This chapter was not too long, so we're going to wrap it up in a little bit. Trust, the tender plan. Okay. This part here, it says this brings us to the issue of rebuilding trust. Okay, they have apologized, they've done all the things in the five languages, expressing regret, they've accepted a responsibility, they're making restitution, they are repenting, and they are requesting for forgiveness. And now comes the area of rebuilding trust, because a person can forgive, they can let it go, they have gotten to the point where I can move on. I do want to continue with this relationship. And now it's the trust factor. Okay. Forgiveness and trust are not to be equated, because forgiveness is a decision. It can be extended immediately, when one perceives he has heard a sincere apology. However, trust is not a decision, it is rather an emotion. Okay. Trust is an emotion. Trust is that gut level confidence that you will do what you say you will do. Okay. And so now, if you have individuals that have forgiven and now they are working on rebuilding the trust. Obviously, trust has a cognitive aspect, as it says on page 147. I choose to believe that as a person of integrity is a statement based on trust. However, this statement is rooted in the soil of emotions. Trust is that emotional sense that I can relax with you and don't have to be suspicious. I can let down my emotional guard because you will not knowingly hurt me. So trust, as it says, gets the person to a place where they can feel comfortable and relaxed. You know how two friends, female friends, they have a good relationship with one another. They talk and they share different things with one another, and then at some point their relationships get severed for whatever reason. They feel betrayed or something has taken place. And so um, now they're trying to rebuild it and they want to get to the place where I'm not suspicious of what you do, that you're not going to share what I share with you, that you're not going to take our conversation with the other person that we also friends with. You know how that go. I'm gonna talk to you, and then you gonna share what I share with you with the other sister down the road, and so that creates a barrier, and so now I can't trust you. I remember my father had a saying that he said would say when he was talking to someone. He said, "Now when I'm talking to you, I'm talking to you." In other words, I'm telling you, but I want you to tell Joe and Bob and Bill everything I'm telling you. When I'm talking to you, I'm talking to you, and that's it. And so that means it's between you and I, and that's it. And so sometimes that happens in relationships when it's like that. And then if it's broken and the trust is broken, then it's time to rebuild. All right. So it takes time to rebuild that relationship. On the bottom of 147, I'm going to read here and then we're going to kind of wind up. Um, he says, I like to visualize trust as a tender plant. When trust is violated, it is as though someone stepped on the plant and pushed it into the mud. The rain and the sun may eventually enable the plant to stand erect again, but it will not happen overnight. So, how do we rebuild trust in a relationship when it has been violated? The answer is by being trustworthy one day at a time. A sincere apology and genuine forgiveness open the door to the possibility of trust growing again. How does this happen? In my experience and working with couples through the years, it is fostered best when the offender chooses to open his or her private life to the scrutiny of the offended spouse. Okay. And so the trust um, is the answer, it says, is by being trustworthy one day at a time. So in order to build that trust, you got to show that you are trustworthy. And so maybe with those couples, you can begin to share with them, how can you show your wife or your husband that you are trustworthy? What are some things that you can do to show them that you are sincere about your apology, you are sincere about reconciling this relationship? What are some things that you can do? And you can have them begin to identify those things. Then that way, that those are the things that they can begin to work on to restore that relationship. All right, forgiveness holds the power to give renewed life to the relationship. An apology alone cannot restore relationships. An apology is a request for forgiveness. It is the gift of forgiveness that ultimately restores the relationship. So apology is just not going to take it. Well, I'm sorry. I apologize. I didn't mean to. That it doesn't end there. A lot of times we think it does. Well, I did apologize. So what's the what's the big deal? But the person has to forgive you. They have to let it go. They have to move on. They have to do what is necessary to reconcile the relationship. Okay, so that's about what this chapter is about: learning to forgive, not trying to hold grudges or trying to get revenge, because just as God has forgiven us, when we ask for forgiveness, He is faithful and just to forgive us and to cleanse us of all unrighteousness. And so, if God has given the extension to forgive us and has forgiven us, then we too should extend that same kind of love. All right. So, statements of forgiveness, page 151. We're wrapping up here. I am deeply hurt by what you said. I think you realize that. I appreciate your apology because without it, I don't think I could forgive you. But because I think you are sincere, I want you to know that I forgive you. All right. So that's the extending choice of them forgiving. What can I say? I am touched by your apology. I value our relationship greatly. Therefore, I'm choosing to forgive you. I didn't know if I would ever be able to say this sincerely. I was devastated by what you did. I would never have imagined you capable of doing such a thing. But I love you and I choose to believe that your apology is sincere. So I am offering you my forgiveness. Your work error has cost me both time and money. I want to forgive you for causing this problem. Yes, I believe that with your correction plan in place, I can forgive you. Remember that the intent to change was that repentance, the intent to change, and then having a plan to change. So I know how hard it is for you to swallow your pride and say, I was wrong. You're grown in my eyes, and I do forgive you. All right. So that's chapter 9. Chapter 9, learning to forgive. Um, so there are some good points in this particular chapter, and so important for us to walk through the forgiveness cycle, and so that people will not hold grudges, but that they are willing to take the relationship back to restoration and reconciliation by forgiving that particular individual and not trying to get revenge. All right, so for the next time, I'm going to email an assignment. And then I also want you to do the apology language profile that is found on page 270 of the book. Okay, it's the apology language profile. So that is to help for you to discover your apology language, because as it talked about the different languages of how we apologize, and what types of apologies we will accept. So page 270, you will do that, and I also will send another assignment, written assignment, to your emails. All right, thank you.